what is a race to the bottom? And one author looked at how this might be making laboratories for democracy. In the other case, the other author discussed it creating races to the bottom. Race to the bottom is an important concept for you to understand. A race to the bottom is a competitive situation in which you have a series of rivals. Could be two, could be more. And these rivals lower costs, fees, etc. to retain a business or an economic benefit. So it's a competition, it's a market competition. The competition favors the business or the thing being bid on. It does not favor the bidders. So the people bidding for this service, this benefit, or this business, will be giving up major considerations, and that could come in a number of factors, all to retain that thing. Eventually, what happens is that the lowest bidder, in this case, or not the lowest bidder, but the bidder who's willing to concede the most and get the lowest return, will actually win the company, the good, the benefit. So what it tends to do is it can bring down conditions. For example, environmental controls, labor payments, taxes paid by the company, utility payments can be cut. And I think it's easy if you just take a look at a couple of examples and we can talk about it. Case one is one I watched happen when I lived in Ohio, and that's the case of the Jeep plant. If you didn't know, Jeeps were originally made by a company called the Willys Overland Jeep Company, which was based in Toledo, Ohio. That's where Jeeps come from. And the Jeep plant has been a legacy car factory there. Jeeps have been made in Toledo since Jeeps were invented. And during the Second World War, because of the need for, by the military, other companies were able to get Jeep contracts and manufacture there because the United States had to make more than the Jeep plant could put out. But what happened over the years was that Chrysler, Dodge acquired Jeep, and it became a part of that brand. And by 2000, a German company, Daimler, had purchased Chrysler. And so at that time, Daimler was now the German parent company was trying to get certain concessions out of the city of Toledo, Ohio, the home of Jeeps, in order for them to stay there. Because if you know where Toledo, Ohio is, right north of the city is the Michigan state border. And the state of Michigan, having obviously its ties to the auto industry, was making a play, telling Daimler it would give a certain number of concessions to Daimler if they moved the Jeep plant to Michigan. The fear was that what was at stake was the Jeep manufacturing plant and approximately 5,000 jobs. Now, it turned out to be quite a mess. So what happened is these two states started bidding against one another to see what they could give up to attract Daimler to stay there and keep these roughly 5,000 jobs. Before this crisis, Jeep had employed about 5,200 workers, and afterwards about 4,900. So it actually retained jobs, but kept fewer of them. What happened in this process is the state of Ohio worked with the city of Toledo to basically slash the utility rates that would be paid by Daimler Chrysler. So basically, their cost per kilowatt hour of electricity, or for water, for sewage, for all of that, was much, much less than the average cost per unit per individual taxpayer. So they had a much, much discounted rate for those things. Their taxes were discounted. The city agreed to put money into developing new parts of the plant that Daimler Chrysler didn't have to spend money on, so the city even agreed to help improve the place they own. Think about this. Imagine you run a factory or a business, and you say, I'm going to leave to this other state. They're offering me this new plant and these concessions, and you come back and say, okay, well, I'll meet those concessions, and I'll just fix your factory and expand it for you, and you won't have to pay anything. So what happens is that basically a business person has now been given a free place to run his business. It gets to the point, and of course that's done by taxpayers to keep these jobs here. However, in a lot of the contracts in these scenarios, they're not very binding on part of the producer. So there's not much really keeping them there once this deal is settled. And so several years later, they may go through round 2 of this. And so the idea is that you have, in this case, 2 bidders who are right next door to each other, Ohio and Michigan, all competing for 5,000 important manufacturing jobs and willing to make a number of incredible concessions to keep them there. In the end, who won in this race to the bottom? Daimler Chrysler won. I can't really say that the people of Toledo won all that much. I mean, yeah, they kept about 4,900 jobs, but other than that, the city's not making the same revenue it once did off of that corporation being there. The corporation's not paying the same amount of money or fees to the locale for being there. So it's actually less profitable, and in some ways not profitable, for the city to have retained that business. So the local economy did take a bit of a hit. Now, you may say, well, they don't have to do it and they could let it walk. They certainly could. But this is a race to the bottom. Now, that's one simple way. Now, suppose, and for example, we could also alter this scenario as far as a company moving and examine it from, say, an environmental impact. So, for example, let's say you have a waste management company, and your waste management company happens to operate in the state of Maine, which has a number of environmental regulations. But let's say the neighboring state of New Hampshire decided to lower those standards and make it cheaper and easier for you to operate. So much so that you move your waste management business to New Hampshire, and Maine now has to truck its waste to New Hampshire, and it costs more. So in return, what Maine does in order to keep that waste management company is lowers its environmental standards even lower than New Hampshire's. So the fear is that these kinds of things, when it comes to wages or environmental or protection controls, all these things can be sort of the cost of a race to the bottom. And one of the roles of, say, in our federal system of the federal government is to step in and set sort of that floor. You can't go any lower than X. But there are cases, as you've seen, where the federal government can't or doesn't have the power to do that. Or 2, Congress wants no part of that. So that becomes an interesting quandary. In a second case study, we could look at something simpler, moving a sports team. In 2006, after Hurricane Katrina, 1 year later, the city of New Orleans was basically involved in a semi-bidding war for its hometown football team, the New Orleans Saints. Who were the other bidders? Who knows? People have mentioned the possibility of moving to Los Angeles. Los Angeles needs a football team. I think they keep Los Angeles empty from having a football team in some cases to always have a mystery possibility anytime a current team wants a brand new publicly funded stadium. But in this case, the New Orleans Saints is the company at stake, the storied and beloved professional franchise in New Orleans. And what the ownership group of the Saints wanted was a publicly funded stadium where the public picks up the bill. They fund the stadium, they pass a bond issue, they go into debt, and taxes pay to build the stadium. The team owner keeps almost all the revenue from the stadium, from tickets, concessions, broadcast, inducement, and he's to be paid an inducement fee of roughly $6 million per year to keep him from looking at moving to other markets. So, let's get this straight. The state of Louisiana, governed by a guy who considers himself a budget-slashing conservative, Bobby Jindal, at the time, says, yes, we'll pay you a $6 million a year tax-subsidized fee to keep you from moving the team somewhere else. The threat, of course, with moving a sports team is that they will move and teams will fight over what concessions they have. So in order to keep the team, this city provides basically a free place for this business to operate and run, and the person who owns the team gets to keep the profits, almost all of the profits, from that location. So, for example, this would be like me building you. You say you wanted to run and open a large movie theater that could also be a venue for touring musical acts and plays, and you don't have the capital or don't want to front the capital for an arena or a theater because you know it will cost a lot of money. And so let's say in your estimation the theater would cost $5 million to construct. You don't want to front the $5 million, but you say, look at all the business and the economic benefit I'll bring to the area. Therefore, I want the city or taxpayers to front this, but in order to stay afloat, I need to keep almost all the revenue from selling tickets, concessions, and everything else from this theater. And we go into the city council meeting and we agree and say, yes, it's a taxpayer-funded theater, but you basically keep all the money from it. That's a big thing. And a lot of studies have been done on the economic benefits of these stadiums to the cities around them. And most of the studies have concluded that beyond at least the first year, there is no major new economic benefit provided by any stadium investment. In other words, it does not revitalize economies. You know, you hear a lot of that talk from major sports, and of course it's in their interest too. But there's been a number of studies calling that into question. What you do have is a case in which a race to the bottom helps to publicly fund a place of business for a very rich person. However, at the same time, if you want to keep your team, you've got, and it's a marketplace environment. The problem becomes, when cities are willing to commit, $150 million worth of tax monies to a stadium and, are having trouble funding their school system at the same time. So that becomes a political issue. So what we have in this case in a race to the bottom are cases where cities and people will take less in return to keep something, retain something they see as a benefit. And of course, what it means is without a governor or a mediator or some sort of rule setting a floor to this, these bidders will bid each other, and the winner will be the asset or the company, the thing being bid on, and it will bid. You'll have these competitors bidding themselves into basically a situation where there's not nearly the benefit that they had hoped for. So it's the danger of races to the bottom. In a federal system, one of the sort of antidotes to a race to the bottom scenario is, in fact, a federal authority. And so as we'll see, as you've seen in the articles, that becomes a question. Are these new deregulated moments opportunities for local democracy to really thrive, or do they create new races to the bottom in a number of states? So we'll see what you decide.